Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast, where it's all about turning your job search into a slam dunk. Your host is Angela Copeland.
Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Angela Copeland. Live on the phone with me today, I have Sharon Hill in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Sharon is the president of her business, Sharon Hill International. Sharon offers a variety of workshops, as well as individual training and customer programs on topics ranging from business etiquette to diversity in the workplace. Her background includes more than 20 years as a development and marketing manager at Fortune 500 company IBM. She was also an international director for Toastmasters International and has authored 4 books on etiquette and success. Sharon, thanks for joining me today.
My pleasure, Angela. Glad to be here.
Well, I mentioned to you just before we got started that it was actually, as I was preparing, it was tough to kind of narrow down the questions because your experience covers so many relevant topics.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, so we're gonna kind of jump around on different topics today, but I'm really excited to have you. And
okay.
The very first thing I'd like to touch on is generational differences in the workplace. And I hear about this a lot because it's a very common frustration right now with, people who are older feeling frustrated by people who are younger and vice versa. And so from your perspective, what are some things that we should keep in mind with regards to generational differences?
Well, thank you, Angela. This is one of my most popular topics, by the way, within corporations, because the problem you just described is rampant because the baby boomers don't understand the Gen X, don't understand the Gen Y, and it just causes friction and conflict. What I teach is, and this is what I think is really critical, is to understand what was happening in the world, not in the world, in the United States when each generation was born. That's because that whole generation acts and feels and thinks and is wired a certain way. So very quickly, for example, people born before 1946, who we call traditionalists, they had one common enemy when we had World War II. We had Hitler, we had Japan, whatever. The country was united. The man was the head of the family. He could work 40 years and get that gold watch, and that was fine. Women stayed at home. So the kids learned from that generation. Those kids were the baby boomers. I'm a baby boomer. Mm-hmm. Baby boomers found, I'm not going to live like that. I'm not going to work 40 years for a gold watch. So the baby boomers started saying it's all about career. And as a result, a lot of the baby boomers raised latchkey kids who didn't see their parents. And those kids are the Generation X. And Generation X said, between 1964 and 1980, Gen X said, I'm going to coddle my babies because my parents weren't here. And as a result, we now have the Gen Y between 1980 and 2000 that is driving people crazy because all they do is talk via their thumbs and their fingers onto the electronic devices. So in understanding all these people, the teaching that I do helps you understand what was happening. 9/11 had a big effect of diseases and everything. But the main thing I want to tell people without going into much detail is a book I read by a gentleman named Robert Dylan Schneider, and he wrote an article, a book actually, and he wrote about working well with young people and what young people should know about older workers. And Angela, just to give you an excerpt from what he said is to the older people, listen, don't lecture. Mm-hmm. How many times do you hear, in my day, we had to walk uphill in cold weather both ways. Kids don't want to hear that. So in order to work well in the workplace, don't lecture, just listen. That'll help you ingratiate yourself with the other generation. He says, don't be patronizing. Young people are turned off by condescension. And this is a harder one for those who are older than the Gen Y. Keep up with the pop culture. Make sure you're tuned into the present. What's going on in the news, the TV shows, what musicians are popular, what websites young people like. Get familiar with those ways, just so they don't consider you an old fogey because you can't understand what they're talking about. Those are some quick pop things to do. And then for the younger bosses, to get to know their older workers, Robert suggests they've got people skills that boost morale. Don't just consider them old and outdated. Understand they have people skills because a lot of the younger generation doesn't seem to have the same amount of people skills as the older generation. Mm-hmm. They know how to work. You'll find, for example, the Uber drivers, They wrote an article on how they're hiring older workers. They feel they're more dependable. They appreciate the job. And then also he said they can make you look good. To the young boss, the old workers can make you look good. They can help you excel at your job. And finally he said the older generation expect leadership to lead. So a young person shouldn't feel intimidated by the older person working for them because of age. Be a leader, and that will get you through. So that's a very, very quick synopsis of how you can work intergenerationally within the workplace, Angela.
Oh, I like that a lot. It's interesting. I see these kinds of issues coming up also in families, because as the sort of career environment has changed and younger people tend to switch jobs more frequently, you have the parents who, grew up in a different environment, and they tend to sometimes really question those decisions by younger people to make those changes. So I see those conflicts also happening within families as well.
And resentment when if dad worked for over 20 years in the same company, the paradigm now is the new generation will probably have 10 to 12 to 14 jobs in their lifetime. They consider company loyalty as 2 weeks' notice.
Right.
They just don't have the same affinity towards working. It's just a job. Whereas the older generations, it was a career and they felt loyalty. Those days are gone.
Right, exactly. And now a career is something that you build over time with these different pieces. You kind of put them together. But the other thing that's really interesting right now with regards to generations in the workplace, I just saw a number recently, and I can't remember the exact number of people who are scheduled to retire this year from the baby boomers, but the number was so huge that they estimated that 25% of all millennials will be promoted to become a manager this year.
Oh, can you believe it? I read that also, and they said the one that the agency that's really going to suffer is the Social Security Administration, because when it came about, everybody kept their jobs for so long, government job. Huge percentage, as you said, are going to be retiring. Who is going to take their place but the younger people who don't really know a lot about Social Security, but yes, they're going to have fast promotions because they got to fill those slots. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think there are some people who've just been waiting, especially people from Generation X, who've been waiting and waiting and waiting for this to happen, who may or may not feel completely prepared because they weren't trained always on how to be that manager yet, because they were always kind of waiting in the wings. So I think it's going to be an interesting time.
Absolutely.
Well, the other issue that comes up, which I find incredibly interesting, is cultural differences in the workplace. And more often, fortunately, we're working in places with people who are different than we are. And I bet that you may have seen that at places that you have even worked. So I would love some feedback on how, we can better work within an organization that's made up of really diverse people.
Yes. The main thing I suggest to people is step out of your comfort zone. Talk to people who are different. For example, if you want to get a mentor, get someone who is different from you. If you're a man looking for a new job, find somebody who can mentor you who might be an Asian woman, because in the workplace you may be interviewing with an Asian woman. Rather than staying in your comfort zone for in terms of diversity, step out and question. And also, there's study as to what can turn people off. For example, the question of asking a black person, how come black people change their hair? How come they see the Star-Spangled Banner so differently? No, there's certain questions that are taboo. If you get to go to lunch, invite folks to lunch, even if it's in the company cafeteria, to get to know them. Instead of having these pockets of affinity groups sitting with each other, cross the line and get to talk to people. It's okay to ask questions. Try not to offend, but don't make assumptions. The biggest part about problems with diversity is assumptions people make. Assumptions that they're so stereotypical, they can destroy the company, they can destroy the organization. So if you have the questions, do some studying, do some reading up, attend different sort of events, go with other people just to get to know them. Buddy up is what I say, as opposed to sticking with your stereotypes, whether they're racial, whether they're religious, whether they're cultural. Just please look at other people, talk to them, don't be afraid, and be gentle with your questions because you don't want to offend. But most of the problems that I've seen when I was a manager at IBM is the very problem I just described. Mm-hmm. People wanted to stay in their own in their own pent-up little area here. And the stereotypes we had, Angela, were just disgusting. And I also say confront. If someone says something that is offensive to you, confront and always ask a question. Don't say, how dare you? Ask, what did you mean by that? Or why did you say that? Because sometimes words can be misinterpreted. Mm-hmm. I had a woman once tell me I was haughty. I said, I'm haughty? She thought she was paying me a compliment, meaning I was dignified. I said, haughty, and I gave her some neck, Angela. What do you mean? Haughty. Question, what did you mean by that? Different cultures have different languages. Also, there's go online, and there's books out called Kiss, Bow, or Shake Hands by Terry Morrison. Kiss, Bow, or Shake Hands tells you how to deal with other cultures from around the world so as not to offend, both in a business sense, mostly in a business sense, and also from a personal sense. For example, you don't shake hands with certain religions. It's against the rules. In India, you don't shake hands with a woman at all unless her husband is there. Just read Kiss, Bow, or Shake Hands for a better understanding, and then trying to apply it in business so that you don't offend. And it makes you look good when you're educated as to the different cultures.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I love that. You know, for most of my life, a lot of my friends have been from other countries. And, you know, when I've gotten people together, I've realized that about half of my friends at a party that I might throw would be from the U.S. and half would be from somewhere else, you know, and all over the world. And I think the reason for me that has just kind of happened over and over has been that I have a real interest in getting to know people from other cultures. And I am open to asking questions, and I want to know more about that person, but I want to know them as a person, not as, you know, I have this curiosity about this thing about what you said about hair or whatever. Like, getting to know someone is about like relating to them on common ground. It's not necessarily about finding out about these kind of weird things that you are thinking about in the back of your head somewhere.
Yes.
You know,
Those
I mean,
are the magic words. Yes, you said be curious. That's the magic key, Angela. Be curious.
Yeah, curious but not judgmental, like open and genuinely interested, not only to learn about them, but also available to share things about yourself, I think. Yeah, it goes really far in terms of allowing people to connect to you who may, on the surface, seem really different than you.
Right, and eat different foods. You know that when the Backstreet Boys years ago went to England, they carried McDonald's hamburgers with them because they were afraid of what the food might taste like overseas. Ridiculous. Be curious. Try different cuisines. I love Indian food, for example. Try it. You know, and people turn up their nose without even trying it. So that helps to ingratiate you to other cultures as well.
Yeah, I think that really has helped me as well. I love all kinds of food. And so when I go to other countries, whether it was, you know, when I went to India or anywhere, I will just eat whatever is put in front of me, even if I don't know what it is.
Oh, you're good.
So I think it helps those people to be comfortable with you and more interested to share with you. Well, you know, this kind of leads us into another topic, which is politics. And you know, at work, so much of our success is based on politics. And I think often when we're raised, we're told, you know, if you just work hard, do a good job, you'll be promoted, everything will work out. But then you find out later that there's maybe other things going on. And I know that you teach a workshop called 10 Steps for Winning at Office Politics. And I'd love it if you could share some maybe tips or share some of the top mistakes that we're making today that we should focus on.
Yes, and glad to. And in defining politics, it's usually someone has more power over a person and misuses it, or games people play, or drama within the business world. Angela, my top two are, well, actually my top one is, I'm using air quotes, understand who your air quotes enemies are, understand who your allies are. Because for some reason, in a perfect world, you go into the company, you do your job, you learn everything inside and out, you put in the time, and you expect to get promoted, as you said. But there could be people for various reasons, jealousy, insecurity, racial problems, that suddenly just do not want to see you get ahead. And all of a sudden, you find yourself stymied thinking, what's going on here? The advice I give is, one, never let your enemies know who they are. You don't have to let them know that you consider them an enemy. But stand close to your enemies, control your emotions, and never harbor ill will, which is easier said than done. When I find in the past couple of my years at IBM, whatever, that's my biggest point of discussion, when people weren't getting along, it's amazing how if you just say, why don't you two go to lunch together, or let's go to lunch together, talk to each other outside the environment to get to know each other. It's amazing. You might discover the person is completely cuckoo and it's never going to work, but still always hold your head high and do the best you can. Because if you answer their drama, you're taking your eye off the ball of what's good for the organization. Mm-hmm. Then nothing happens and everybody can be in trouble. And also when it comes to your allies, understand how to keep them close so that they can speak for you, depending upon what the situation is. So spend time with your enemies, and I use air quote enemies, and also stay close to your allies, just so you can build your own power base, depending upon what the job is, of course, and how high you are in that company, rather than giving into bickering, fighting, backstabbing. It affects your health. It affects the organization in a negative way. And another thing I say, Angela, if it gets beyond control, leave. Because if politics go against your ethics, if anything happens in that, for example, daddy's son now owns the company, and now his son's son, it goes through. If you just don't like the ethics of the company, get out of there and do what makes you happy. But if you have to stay because you got to eat, you got to get a paycheck, there we are. Try to play along with the game and get to know where the power lies. For example, if one person is 4 steps higher than you are, if based on the rules of the company, try to get to know that person. Don't be intimidated to say, can we go to lunch, or can I take a bit of your time, or can I ask you to be my mentor? Try all those kind of different aspects of being a positive employee within the organization and not fall prey to the enemies who want to do you in.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So do you find that politics become more of an issue the further up the food chain that you go, like the more that you get promoted?
I would say that in the old days, but in those days being my early days at IBM, I tell people I started IBM when Moby Dick was a minnow way back when. I find that the people who are the baby boomers do tend to still have the politics at the higher level. Today, with everybody dressing more casually, more horizontal management as opposed to vertical management, where the managers now sit in the same room as eating the same cafeteria as opposed to having a room off to the side. It seems to be decreasing, Angela, as the years go, as far as it being higher. Of course, you always have your cuckoos out there who have their hidden agendas, but I think it's decreasing. But what you asked was completely true with the baby boomers. They wanted career was their goal. Stepping on people was their goal, like it or not. I see that decreasing as time goes on with the new generation.
Well, I like that feedback. That's a good, piece of insight, and I could see where you're coming from. I have seen some people who, didn't think politics were really an issue until they received a promotion, and then all of a sudden they were right in the middle of it when they became a manager. But I like your point there that it's maybe decreasing because of some of the ways that we're making things more sort of equitable looking, or however you want to say it, on the outside. Well,
can I add another point?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Next question. As you were speaking, it occurred to me there's also a lot of different races considered there to be a political problem, or maybe there is not one. I got my MBA on working on blacks in corporate America, and it was amazing how many black men either felt or were told they were intimidating just because they were black. They also didn't want to go play golf. They also didn't want to go, air quotes, drinking with the boys because it wasn't their thing. And then they couldn't understand why they didn't get promoted. There's a term we call playing the game without selling out. If you just feel that everybody has a master's degree or a doctorate and you've only got a bachelor's or no degree at all, you might go in feeling that the odds are stacked against you. Perish that thought. Cross over the line and try to get to know people, as you said, Angela, as the person that they are. Then when it comes time for promotions, people promote people that they like. Mm-hmm. Don't let those racial barriers or anything self-imposed hold you back.
I totally agree. And I think you're absolutely right. I do think, though, that there are times when you approach those issues and you test them and you find out that they are still a little bit there. And I can tell you one example. You mentioned golfing. In my own career as an executive, I was often one of the only women. And so I began taking golf lessons because I didn't want to be left behind when folks went, for meetings on the golf course, which would happen. And I didn't want to be the driver of the golf cart. I wanted to actually play. So I took lessons, and I was going, 3 days a week to the golf course to really learn how to play golf. And what I learned, at the time at least, was the people that I was working with were still playing golf. The guys were still going, and I still was not being invited.
Angela, really?
Yeah. So even though I would have lunch with them and hang out with them in other scenarios, they really did. It was kind of a boys' club. And so I assumed that I wasn't being invited because I didn't know how to play golf. So I went and learned how to play golf. And then I still wasn't invited. So I think you're right. I don't think we should assume that those barriers are there and that we should just walk away. But I think they are still sometimes there. And sometimes when you find that they are still there, maybe that's not the right organization for you. Maybe.
Absolutely.
You should move on.
One more point based on what you said. My husband, also an IBM, was told in Rochester, New York, you've got to play golf to get ahead. He refused. He did not sell out. He refused. They also told him, cut off your mustache in IBM. We don't like facial hair. He refused. He stood on his principles. So you don't have to, just to echo what you just said, Angela, you don't have to play that, air quote, game if it's not your thing, if your work stands for itself. And my husband did get promoted up to corporate technology. So you don't have to play that game if it goes against your principles.
That's right. But you do, I think, need to be aware of how that will impact you and, realize that you're making that choice deliberately. And,
absolutely.
And that you're kind of, if you stay there, that you're accepting those consequences, or you may choose to go somewhere where the game is played a little differently.
Yes, true. Absolutely true.
Yeah. So kind of also along the lines of politics is gossip. And I don't think we've ever covered the topic of gossip on the podcast. So this is kind of interesting.
Oh, good.
Yeah, but especially with sort of the open office environments that you mentioned where everyone's kind of out working together, not only is gossip happening, but it's really tricky and it's hard. How do you think we should handle this? Should we just ignore it or what should we do when gossip is sort of part of our day?
Okay, I have a two-pronged answer for gossip, one of my favorite topics, and I loved it as a manager because this is what I did. If someone comes to me or comes to a person and says, did you hear? I stop them immediately. I say, whatever you're going to tell me, I'm going to go back to the person and tell them you just told me. It's amazing how that stops the conversation. Why are you telling me this? Why do you think you want to tell me this? In other words, I stop it in its heels. If, however, somebody does manage to break through my process here and gives me some gossip, I will go back to the person. For example, I'm going to give you nothing like a good example. A person came to me when I first became a manager and said that one of my employees was not going to work with me because he found me difficult to work with. I said, oh, really, to the person who was gossiping with me. I said, I'm going to go back and tell him now. No, don't tell him. I said, sorry. You told him, so you got to put your money where your mouth is. I went back to the guy. I said, I understand that you can't work with me, repeating the exact words. You can't work with me because I'm difficult to work with. Angela, his face turned so blood red I was going to explode. Who told you that? That's not important. Is that something you said? Yes, I did. The point of this, and I ended up transferring him to another department, tackle gossip head on, because otherwise it's like a cancer within an organization. It's destructive, it's mean-spirited, and I think people who do gossip want to see other people as miserable as they are. Now, I confess I love good dirt, but I cannot in the workplace let it be harmful to anyone else. So to any of our listeners who think, what do I do with gossip? The main thing is, one, stop it in its tracks. If someone says they're going to tell you something, stop it in its tracks, the person who tells you, or tell them, if you tell me this, just understand, I may go back to the person you're talking about and to confirm this. And there we are. No matter how silly or sexual it is, I'm going to go back to the person and tell them. That usually stops them. But if you hear, I had an employee who loved to gossip, Angela, and I had to call him in. So if any of your listeners who are supervisors or in a leadership capacity, when I heard that he was doing this, I called him into my office, and I said, I understand that you said X, Y, Z. Oh, my goodness. When you confront a person, it's amazing how they're on the defense. Oh, my goodness, embarrassed, scared. So always take gossip head on to stop it. Because if it's allowed to fester, it can ruin an organization.
I like that. That's a very interesting perspective, and it sounds very effective. So that's great. Wow. Well, also along the lines of, talking to one another, communication skills are very important in our sort of working environment today, especially between the different generations that we talked about, which are all kind of together. And, we're to a point where we've got so many different ways to communicate, including, the phone, the cell phone, email, instant message, social media. I mean, we are communicating all day long in all different ways. What are some pointers that you can give us about how to be effective communicators?
First, I ask the person what is their preferred communication style. Because as you mentioned, generations have different styles. Some people love to write long emails. Some people just like to tweet or whatever. I ask the person, if we're going to be in a working relationship constantly, what is your preferred? So you say you like to have emails. Fine. Well, Sharon, what's yours? I might say, I prefer to talk on the phone. Knowing that, and if you're allowed to do that, and I work until 2 a.m., don't you be calling me. You send me an email. But if you know what my preferred style is, that helps bridge that gap over people getting angry because a person does the style that they don't appreciate. And, of course, with technology coming in so strongly now, the traditionalists, the baby boomers, and even some of the Gen X have to get on board with learning some of these new technologies of the younger people without selling their soul as to what their preferred style is. The main thing is to communicate. Also, if a person sends emails that are so long that you just stop reading them, once again, go talk to the person and say, you could have said this in 15 words as opposed to page down, page down, page down, page down. I think, Angela, a lot of people are just afraid to talk to people. They'd rather stay in their own little safety zone because if I talk to them, I might offend or might come off wrong. It's amazing how you just talk to a person and keep strong eye contact. You can be very, very effective. Also, if someone does use a style that you don't like, you don't understand, you hear Instagram, all these things, I would just confront them. I don't know what this is. Why don't you teach me how to use this? Or on your own, go out and figure out how to use it. If you want to learn it and if you want to be effective with that person, because the person will feel very comfortable with you if you understand their style, they understand yours, and you can make it work between you. That's the easiest thing for me, is just to either learn it or tell somebody to teach it to me.
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned something interesting there, which was just talking to someone face to face.
Yes.
And I think the first thing about it is, oftentimes when we send an email, we feel like we're sort of able to sort of hide in our own world. It feels comfortable. But email and other text-based communications, they create a really quick way to cause a misunderstanding. Like it can happen quickly, and then things begin to escalate, and then your email that you wrote when you were kind of annoyed can be forwarded to lots of other people. And it's forever a record that you said this thing. But sometimes if you go in person, you can really resolve things immediately. And if you have a misunderstanding, you can see it on their face, and you can say, oh, no, wait, that's not what I was, intending.
Body language.
Right. And you can get it resolved really quickly, and it's in a way that is not in email and circulated. And maybe afterward you send an email confirming that this is what we talked about, but then it's so much cleaner.
It is, I swear. I had 2 women work in the same office back when we had offices opposed to cubes or open spaces. Same office, Angela. They texted each other.
Oh, no.
And finally, one of them turned around and said, I'm right here, because one was so introverted, she didn't know how to talk to people. So that was her power position, was sending off little messages instead of just talking to people, which is so valuable for all the reasons you just stated. Absolutely, talk to people.
Right. Well, you kind of implied just now that you can sometimes do things like that and it can annoy your coworkers. And, I know that you actually teach an entire workshop on the topic of irritating office behaviors.
Yes. Oh, my goodness, yes.
What are some of those irritating office behaviors that you hear about and that you kind of talk about with folks when you give workshops?
The list is as long as my arm, but I'll give you some of my top ones, Angela. Some people love to walk into a person's space, be it an office, be it a cubicle, be it a desk, and just interrupt. A person can be on the phone, a person can be intently trying to get something out before noon, and they walk up and just start talking. Hey, did you see the game last night? Interrupting without saying, do you have a minute or whatever. That's one of the biggest ones, is just not appreciating other people's time, walking right interrupting. In some cases, there's loud music. Now, in most cases now, people have their earbuds or whatever, but some offices, they've had loud music, which is an irritant. Cologne, heavy perfume. There was one woman who was pregnant, walked into the ladies' room just as another one was spraying Norel. The pregnant woman started puking all over everything because it was so obnoxious. It upset her stomach, and it was horrible. And this woman just continued. I've also had to advise some of my employees when someone says, I can't stand that cologne he's wearing, it's too strong. I have to go back and tell him, cut back on the cologne. That was irritating. And the other thing I got a comment on was smelly food. If you have a kitchen or a common area where everybody wants to eat, some people will bring in foods that just smell up the whole place.
Mm-hmm.
It's just awful. And that's just an irritant. Those 4 examples are just 4 of many in which it can affect the workplace, it can affect productivity, it can cause gossip, it can cause all these negative things we're talking about. Those are just a few. And once again, we're back to our basics. Talk to the person.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to the person. One thing I have for irritating people who want to walk in while you're trying to work and just take a seat while you're working is to put books on the chairs so they can't sit down.
That's a great idea.
They can't sit down, and then they move. But also tell the person in a nice way, if you want to, if they don't say, got a minute, is to hold up one finger and say, I'm trying to get this done. Can I come see you after I finish? So you aren't shutting them out, but you're giving them, I say, never say no without an option. I cannot talk to you right now. Can I come talk to you later today? Can we talk tomorrow? Can I just follow up with you by telephone or whatever? Always give them an option, but don't let them control you. Irritating behavior means you're letting someone else control you and distract you from what you're doing. Mm-hmm. Talk to the person in a polite way. Always be polite. And one word I haven't used during this whole podcast is smile. Smile gets you so many points when you're being nice about it that people listen as opposed to automatically being turned off. So if they have an irritating behavior, Angela, please confront them in a nice way and always say, may I tell you something, or may I ask you something? What are you cooking that smells like that? Because it's making my eyes burn, or it's distracting. Something like that. Ask permission to give someone advice, and then it'll soften the blow.
I like that. And the suggestion with the books and the chairs is fantastic. The other thing, when you ask someone, you say, can we set up a time to talk? I'm always very impressed when someone says to you, I really want to talk about this, but I can't right now. Let's set up a time because it's really important to me. I really like it when they kind of re-emphasize that, like, I really want to be engaged. I'm not just trying to blow you off, but I have this other thing. I think it's really nice when they take the time to do that. Yes,
and it shows that they want to keep the relationship open as opposed to putting your hand in your face and turning you off, because it's all about relationships, Angela, in the workplace. And one last thing, never start a conversation with, I have a bone to pick with you.
Oh, no.
Don't never say that. Automatically, the shackles are raised and people are going to be mad. Always ask a question before you give advice. Yes.
Yeah, well, another area that can sometimes cause irritation is humor. And, when it comes to humor in the workplace, what should we keep in mind in terms of boundaries? I mean, we're talking about working with different generations and people from different cultures. We've got a lot of dynamics at play.
Mm-hmm. That's where management comes in as well, by putting some sort of an edict or mission statement as we will not allow certain kinds of humor in the workplace. Some, in the good old boy days, back to traditionalists and back to the baby boomers, the guys would always have their sexual humor or their blue, as they call it, blue humor, or sexist humor or whatever. Just don't do it. I say with humor, apply common sense. But now, if you're the third person, now legally, legally, if you're a third person overhearing two people telling nasty jokes, legally, you can take that to the EEOC. I cannot work in this place because now ideally you would tell them, stop it, I don't like that you're offending me. But some people who are more passive will take it to somebody else to say, I just heard them say this and I didn't like it, be it sexual, be it racial. Most people are intimidated to go and tell the person, that was not funny and I didn't appreciate it. They're afraid to do that. I have done that. I was sitting at a poker table in Las Vegas when someone used a joke and used the word colored. So the colored girl said, I immediately said, that is not funny. And you say it firmly. You say it making eye contact so they don't think you're being just super sensitive wussy. I look at them. They all look down their cards and look at me. It stopped it. It stopped it. The easiest answer, Angela, is to confront it if you hear it. And if you're the person who's tempted to share a story, either online or in person, don't do it. You can get your company in trouble.
It's interesting you make the point about talking to them directly. I know that can be really hard, but the thing that's tough is when you do report something, whether it's humor or any kind of inappropriate behavior, oftentimes the person that you report it to, one of the things that they ask you right away is, did you communicate this to them? So, you also, if you do communicate it to them on the front end, which again, I know is really tough to do sometimes, but if you do communicate it to them, then you've got that piece of information. If you do feel like you need to escalate it, you can say, yes, I did communicate it very clearly. They know that this is a problem.
Yes. And if they continue doing it, shame on them. But people, Angela, they're just afraid to cause friction in the workplace, afraid somebody's going to come down on them for being too sensitive. That doesn't count. If you're, by law, it's not your intent, it's the effect. So if you intended to be funny, but a person took that as harassment, the law is on the person on the side of the person who feels harassed.
And I think it makes sense to try to resolve these things and to try to work through this system. But I also think there are times when, it doesn't always have to be the employee's personal goal to change a whole company. Like at some point you may say, maybe this organization isn't for me. Maybe I should work somewhere that's a little more equal and fair and that is going to make me happier. But
absolutely,
on the front end, I really like your tell them, and if you need to, tell someone else as well. Because, that can be, it's just such a tough situation. Well, when I was doing research for the podcast, I noticed that you have a very personal story that's actually quite compelling, and you can share as much or as little as you would like. But oftentimes when we're just starting off and we're working our way up kind of from the bottom, there are a lot of things that we have to learn in order to be successful in the corporate environment. And I just love it if you might share a few pointers for those of us who may be kind of starting from a different perspective and trying to figure out our way up the corporate ladder.
Yes, when I started with IBM, I was one of the blessed ones. Everyone at IBM at the time I started either had a bachelor's, most of them had master's degrees, and I was still going to night school as a secretary, Angela. When I interviewed for it, I've just been blessed with a certain confidence that I have nothing to lose, dress properly, answer the questions as directly as I could. They brought me in, and I never looked back. It was just so exciting. And what I did to the hints and tips I would give the listeners, Angela, is, first of all, I learned everything there was about that job. I learned about the products. I learned about the people. I learned about the customers. I would sometimes be at the office till 1 or 2 a.m. just working on a system just to understand how it worked. Beyond that, I shared the information. I became the expert. So whether it's law, medical, technical, whatever, become as much as you can the expert and share the information. Be the go-to person when something happens. That was the first thing. The other thing I did was I volunteered. Whenever my boss would say, we need somebody to, let's say, run the charitable contribution campaign this year. My plate was already full, working full-time at the job, going to school at night until I finally got my bachelor's and my MBA, to say, okay, I'll do it. Everybody else took a giant step backward. I took a giant step forward because you have to be a strong time manager to say, if you take on something else, how are you going to successfully accomplish it and accomplish the other things on your plate successfully? managed to do that because my goal was just, first of all, just to be there, firstly, but to be able to also learn. When you take on something you don't know what it is, I'll say, if somebody will train me, I'll take that on. Your manager loves you because you've taken the load off of him or her. You're learning more, and you're expanding your visibility. So by volunteering for things, especially to affect the whole company, corporation, organization, people got to see me, know me, and when opportunities came around, I didn't even know people were putting my name in the hat for certain things. And every 18 months, I was getting promoted. I wasn't asking for these promotions. People came to get me because positive attitude, smile, dedicated to the job, learned the organization, got along well with the people, shunned the gossip, didn't start any gossip, and kept it going. That was the main thing I did, was be a workhorse and still have a balance between your personal and business life. But don't just, like I said from the very beginning, don't just assume if I do this job, I'll just get promoted. It doesn't happen. People have to know who you are. Also, get mentors, as I mentioned earlier, who are different than you are. I had mentors, men, women, Asian, Indian, who would just say, I'd love to help you. When I come to them, would you please tell me about this, how I learned about this, and I need to know about this. And always be on time if you have a mentor and follow the action items you come up with. People who wouldn't, when I became a mentor of so many, if a person was late, if a person didn't complete the action items from the last discussion, I had to drop them. You're wasting my time. So don't waste your mentor's time. Also, difference between a mentor and a sponsor finds you. You find your mentor. If someone's watching from afar and believes in you, that's a sponsor. When they come to you, that's your golden key now to success because somebody's going to be looking after you. So all those things put together, and shun my hoodlum friends because I had work to do. I had to stay focused. And that was very quickly a synopsis of my success, Angela.
Oh, I like it. You know, one thing that you mentioned, or you alluded to, and there's an author I really like named Ruby Payne, and she mentions that when you are just starting out, the one thing that everyone has in common, regardless of your background, is that we all have 24 hours in the day.
Yes.
And you mentioned being a really strong manager of your own time, and you also mentioned working really late hours. And I think sometimes the one thing that you can do when you don't have a lot of money or you don't have a lot of other resources is that you have that time, if you use it well, that you can get a leg up on other people.
I should add, I don't have any kids. So that made it easier for me. A person with a family might have difficulty time management because you got to pay attention where the priorities are. But if you can do that, it really makes a difference.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we have covered so many different topics. Is there any other advice that you'd like to leave our listeners with today?
Yes, Angela. My final thought is wherever you land in terms of the job, don't make the new days, don't make that your life being. I've heard people commit suicide when they get fired or let go from a job. You are not the job. You are not the company. You are working there. Always have a plan B. Corporations do not love you. Corporations love their shareholders. Do the best you can. Follow all the advice you've had on this podcast, but have your plan B. That if you were told you have 30 days to find a new job or 30 days you're going to be let go, what would you do? So for that reason, please, please, please save the money. Decide what makes you happy. What makes you happy usually brings you less money than you're making now. People who have left IBM and some have gone to real estate, they've done well. Some have opened restaurants, some have done well, some have folded. But have your plan B in place so that you won't go into indulgence and think, oh my God, I just lost my job. You think, good. And that's what happened to me when IBM came through. I'll say this quickly. This is no brag, just fact, Angela. I was a star performer. I had stock options. I was the highest level. I was, all these good things. But a new vice president came in headquarters up in New York who said, let's do some head cuts because we got too many people on board at IBM. Let's cut Sharon Hill's department. Even though we were saving $4 million a year for the company, let's just get rid of Sharon Hill's department. Best thing ever for me because then I stepped into my etiquette passion and wrote my book, and started speaking about etiquette throughout the country. So have that plan B is my message to everyone.
I love it. Well, that leads me into my very last question, which is how can listeners learn more about you and your business, Sharon Hill International?
I was just going to my website, SharonHillInternational.com. Sharon, SharonHillInternational, all spread out.com. I have podcasts. I have etiquette tips, 30 different items that I'm certified to speak on, everything from conflict in the workplace to dining etiquette. Everything is on my website. I would strongly suggest, or just get a hold of me on LinkedIn or Facebook. Sharon Anita Hill, Sharon A. Hill. That would be fine.
Fantastic. Well, Sharon, thank you for joining me today.
Pleasure. Thank you so much, Angela. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yes, this discussion's been great. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Tune in next week for another edition of the Copeland Coaching Podcast. And if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher so you never miss an episode.
Thank you for listening to the Copeland Coaching Podcast today with your host, Angela Copeland. Tune in next time to get more great tips on turning your job search into a slam dunk.